She ran away from me at the best moment of my life, and I still don't know why. I was brushing my teeth when my phone started buzzing on the bathroom counter, vibrating so hard it almost fell into the sink. It was her name, and for some reason, before I answered, I already knew this wasn't a normal call. She didn't say hello when I picked up. She just said my name quietly, like she was testing whether it still belonged to me. Then she hung up. That was 3 days before our wedding. I'm writing this because everyone keeps asking me what happened, and I don't know how to explain that. The worst part isn't that she left. The worst part is that I still don't know whether she was running away from me, or from something I helped create without realizing it. We'd been together for almost 6 years. Not the kind of relationship people write movies about. No dramatic first meeting, no on-again off-again chaos. We met through mutual friends at a birthday dinner. I remember thinking she looked tired in a way that felt honest. Not sad, just worn in. Our relationship grew in routines. Grocery shopping on Sundays, folding laundry together on the couch, falling asleep with the TV still on because neither of us cared enough to turn it off. I loved that about us. There was safety in the boring parts. When I proposed, it wasn't flashy. No crowd, no ring hidden in food. We were in the kitchen, barefoot, arguing lightly about whether tomatoes belong in the fridge. I said her name, she turned, and I just knew that if I didn't ask her then, I never would. She cried hard, like deep, shaking sobs. I remember thinking that meant it mattered. The wedding planning was stressful but normal. Deposits, guest lists, her mother micromanaging the flowers. If there were red flags, they were quiet ones. The kind you explain away because you don't want to be the person who ruins something good by overthinking it. She started taking calls in other rooms. At first, it was nothing. Work stuff, she said. Her job was messy and emotional, and I never pushed. Then the calls started coming late. Always late. She'd glance at the screen, hesitate for half a second, then stand up and say, "I just need a minute." I told myself I was being paranoid. People are allowed privacy. Relationships aren't ownership contracts. But there was this one night. It was maybe 2 weeks before the wedding. We were in bed. She was half asleep, breathing slow, her hand resting on my chest. Her phone lit up on the nightstand. I wasn't trying to snoop. I swear that. The light just pulled my eyes to it. No name, just a number. It stopped ringing before it could wake her. A few seconds later, a text came in. "Are you alone?" I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stared at that screen until it went dark again. The next morning, I asked her casually if work was getting intense. She smiled too quickly and said, "Yeah, you know how it is." I didn't know how it was. The week before the wedding felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Like walking through a familiar house where someone had moved the furniture just slightly. Nothing was obviously broken, but I kept bumping into things. She stopped talking about the future. Not in a dramatic way. Just little omissions. No, when we're married. No, after the honeymoon. She talked about things as if they existed in a vacuum, disconnected from us. One night, while we were packing wedding favors at the dining table, I joked, "Can you believe in a week this will all be over?" She looked up at me, eyes sharp, almost frightened. "Over?" she asked. "You know what I mean," I said. She nodded, but her hands were shaking. Later that night, I woke up to find her sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, staring at the wall. It was almost 3 a.m. "What's wrong?" I asked. She flinched like I'd caught her stealing something. "Nothing," she said. "I just couldn't sleep." She didn't get back into bed. 2 days before the wedding, I found something I still don't know how to interpret. I was looking for our passports. They were supposed to be in the drawer where we keep important documents. They weren't. I checked the safe. Nothing. I found them in her work bag, along with a folded envelope addressed to me, in her handwriting. I didn't open it. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me understood that once I did, there was no going back. I put everything back exactly how I found it. When she came home that night, I kissed her like nothing was wrong. That was the last normal thing we ever did together. The day before the wedding, she disappeared for 6 hours. No texts, no calls, just gone. I was sitting in the living room surrounded by half-assembled decorations, trying not to spiral. I told myself she was overwhelmed. That everyone freaks out before a wedding. That this was normal. When she finally came home, her eyes were red, her face blotchy. She smelled like cigarette smoke. "She doesn't smoke. Where were you?" I asked. She looked at me for a long time. "Too long. I needed to think," she said. "About what?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then shook her head. "I can't," she said. "Not right now." That night, she slept on the couch. The morning of the wedding was perfect in the way that makes you uneasy later. Sunlight through the curtains, messages from friends, my parents crying on the phone. She wasn't there when I woke up. Her side of the bed was cold. Her phone was gone. Her bag was gone. I found the envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside was a single page. I love you. I just don't know if I'm allowed to anymore. That was it. No explanation. No apology. No goodbye. She never showed up. People think that's the story. Bride panics, runs away. Happens sometimes. But that's not why I'm here. Because 2 weeks after the wedding that never happened, a man came to my door. He knew my name. He knew hers. He knew where she'd gone. And when I asked him why she ran, he said, because you were getting too close to the truth. I still don't know what truth he meant. And I'm terrified that when I finally do, I won't like who it makes me. The man at the door didn't look threatening in the way movies teach you to expect. No leather jacket, no scars. He looked tired, mid-40s, maybe older. Clean clothes, but worn. Like someone who had stopped caring if things matched as long as they were clean enough. He stood just far enough back from the threshold that it didn't feel like a challenge. That detail matters, because I remember noticing it. I remember thinking he'd done this before. You're Daniel, he said. Not a question. I nodded. My heart was already beating too fast, but I told myself to stay calm. People knock on doors. That's normal. Everything that happens starts as something normal. My name's Aaron, he said. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just think you deserve to know why she left. Every instinct in me screamed to slam the door. Instead, I stepped aside and let him in. That decision still feels heavier than the proposal. Heavier than the wedding that never happened. We sat at opposite ends of the couch. He didn't look around much, but when he did, it was with a strange familiarity, like he'd already seen this place in photos. Or been told about it in detail. She's safe, he said before I could ask. As safe as she can be. Where is she? My voice cracked, and I hated that it did. He shook his head slowly. I can't tell you that. Then why are you here? I wanted to scream it. Instead, I said, you said she ran because I was getting too close to the truth. Yes. What truth? He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. The truth about who she was before she met you. And what you were connected to, whether you knew it or not. I laughed. It came out wrong, sharp, defensive. I think you have the wrong person. I don't, he said. I wish I did. He didn't start with accusations. That would have been easier to reject. He started with dates, places, mundane details. Do you remember a bar called The Hollow? He asked. On 7th Street? My stomach dropped before my brain caught up. I used to go there, I said. Years ago. Do you remember a night about 8 years back, he continued, when a fight broke out in the alley behind it? I remembered, not clearly, not proudly, but I remembered. I'd been younger, angry in a way I didn't understand yet. There was a guy who'd said something about my friend's girlfriend. Shoved someone. Words turned into hands. Hands turned into chaos. I remembered the sound more than anything. A dull crack. Someone hitting the ground wrong. The police came. Statements were taken. No charges. No one wanted to be the one who escalated it. The guy walked away eventually. So did I hadn't thought about it in years. What about it? I asked. Aaron exhaled slowly. That man didn't walk away the same. My throat felt dry. You said no charges. There weren't, he agreed. But there were consequences. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket and placed it on the coffee table between us. Not toward me. Just there. An old hospital discharge summary. A name I didn't recognize. A diagnosis I didn't want to read. Traumatic brain injury. Complications. Long-term impairment. I started. I know, he said quickly. I'm not saying you meant to. That's part of why this is complicated. Then why are you here? I asked. Because she knew, he said. And she knew long before you proposed. He told me she'd been volunteering at a community center years before we met. Helping with legal paperwork, medical appeals, the kind of invisible work that keeps broken systems barely standing. The man from the alley was there. Not every day, but often enough. She never told you, Aaron said. Because she didn't think she'd ever fall in love with you. My head was spinning. So she found out who I was and just, what? Stayed? At first, he said. She didn't know it was you. Just a name, a story. Then one day, she saw a photo. My photo. A group shot from a friend's social media. Tagged, smiling, alive. She asked him if he recognized you, Aaron continued. He didn't. Brain injuries don't work like that. Faces blur. Names disappear. But the fear didn't. I felt sick. She tried to leave you then, he said. 3 years ago. That stopped me cold. What? I whispered. You remember when she almost moved for that job out of state? He asked. The one she said fell through. I remembered. The crying. The relief when it didn't work out. The way I'd held her and told her everything would be okay. She backed out, Aaron said. Because she couldn't make herself hurt you for something you didn't understand. My hands were shaking now. So why now? I asked. Why the wedding? Because of the letter, he said. What letter? The one she wrote to you, he replied. The one she planned to give you after the ceremony. The envelope. In her bag. She was going to tell you everything, Aaron said. After it was done. After you were married. She thought maybe then you'd choose to stay. And you think that was wrong? I asked. He looked at me carefully. I think it would have destroyed you. Or him. Or her. Maybe all three. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying memories, looking for cracks. Moments where I'd been cruel without noticing. Where she'd pulled away and I'd convinced myself it was nothing. I thought about the way she'd stared at me when I said the wedding would be over. About her shaking hands. About the cigarettes. In the morning, I drove to the hollow. It had closed. Windows boarded up. Graffiti on the brick. The alley was still there. I stood where I remembered standing. Tried to reconstruct the night. Tried to see myself as someone capable of ruining a stranger's life and then going home to sleep it off. I hated how easy it was to see both versions as true. 2 days later, she emailed me. No subject line, just text. I never lied when I said I loved you. I just didn't know if love was enough to survive the truth. I replied immediately. I begged. I demanded. I asked where she was, who Aaron was, what she wanted from me. She never answered. Aaron called once more. Just once. She's starting over, he said. Somewhere you can't follow. Is that what you think? I asked. Or what she told you to say? Silence. Before he hung up, he said one last thing. If you ever decide to look for him, he said, really look for him, don't. Some truths don't heal. They just spread. It's been almost a year now. People have stopped asking. The pity has faded into awkwardness. I tell them it didn't work out. That's easier. Sometimes I imagine tracking the man from the alley down. Sitting across from him. Telling him I'm sorry. Telling him I didn't know. Sometimes I imagine her showing up at my door the way Aaron did. Tired, careful, asking to be let in. And sometimes I wonder if the reason she ran wasn't because she was afraid of who I was, but because she was afraid of who I'd become once I finally understood. I don't know if I deserve closure. I don't know if she deserves forgiveness. All I know is that the best moment of my life was standing at the edge of a truth I never asked for. And she ran before I could step over it. I realized it the night I finally opened the envelope. The one I'd found in her bag. The one I was too afraid to read before the wedding. The one I kept in a drawer like it might explode if I touched it. It wasn't a confession. It was instructions. Not legal instructions. Not a breakup letter. It was written like someone who expected to disappear suddenly and needed to leave behind something functional, not emotional. Passwords. Account numbers. A list of names with short explanations next to each one. And at the bottom, a sentence that made my stomach turn cold. If anything happens to me before I can explain, please don't trust anyone who comes to you first. Aaron came to me first. I read the letter 3 times before my brain stopped trying to reject it. There were names I didn't recognize. A few I did. One that I absolutely did not expect. Aaron. Next to his name, she'd written. He believes he's protecting me. He isn't. Please be careful. I sat on the kitchen floor for a long time after that. Long enough for daylight to fade without me noticing. Long enough to understand that whatever she was afraid of wasn't just emotional. It wasn't just moral. It was logistical, planned, urgent. I started going through her old things after that. Not in a dramatic way. Not trashing drawers. Just looking carefully, like someone who finally understands they missed something important. She'd kept a second email account. It wasn't hidden well, which bothered me more than if it had been. It was almost like she wanted it to be found, but only by someone patient enough to notice patterns. Most of the emails were mundane. Scheduling, volunteer coordination, medical forms, but there was a thread marked only with a date. 6 months before the wedding. The subject line was blank. The first message was from her. He proposed. I said yes. I think that was a mistake. The reply came hours later. Are you in danger? Not yet. That word, yet. I don't know how much I should say about what I found after that. Not because I'm protecting anyone, but because I still don't fully understand it myself. There were references to investigations that never officially existed, to settlements that didn't go through courts, to people who lived in the spaces between systems, the kind of people who don't threaten you outright. They just make it clear that resistance will be exhausting. And threaded through all of it was one recurring concern. Me, not as a villain, not as a target, as a liability. She wasn't afraid of what I'd done. She was afraid of what would happen if I remembered it differently than I already had. I confronted Aaron, not in person. I wasn't stupid enough for that. I emailed him from an account he didn't know I'd found. I asked him why he told me she ran because I was too close to the truth, when she'd clearly been planning for months. He didn't deny it. He wrote back, because the truth isn't a single thing. It's a chain, and once you pull on the right link, you don't get to decide where it ends. I asked him if she was safe. He didn't answer that question. Instead, he asked me something I haven't been able to forget. Do you know why she stayed with you as long as she did? Here's the part that makes people uncomfortable when I've tried to explain it. She didn't stay because she forgave me. She stayed because she believed, wrongly, I think, that I was a fixed point. That no matter what she uncovered, no matter what else was unstable, I would remain predictable. Kind, normal, safe. The wedding terrified her because it changed that. Marriage meant shared liability, shared records, shared scrutiny. Marriage meant my past wasn't just mine anymore. 3 days before the wedding, before the phone call, before the disappearance, she accessed something she wasn't supposed to. I know that now. Something that tied the alley incident to a larger pattern. Something that suggested the man I hurt wasn't random. Something that reframed that night not as an isolated accident, but as a data point. And suddenly, I wasn't just a guy who once lost control. I was someone whose memory of himself might not be reliable. The last message I ever got from her wasn't the email. It was a voicemail. She must have recorded it while walking, because I could hear traffic. Footsteps. Her breathing. I need you to listen to me, she said. Not react. Not defend yourself. Just listen. She paused. If you ever start remembering that night differently, if details shift, or suddenly feel clearer, that's when you need to stop digging. Promise me that. Another pause. Longer. I'm not leaving because I stopped loving you. I'm leaving because loving you made me realize how dangerous certainty can be. Then she whispered, almost too quietly to hear. Please don't turn into someone who needs to be right more than he needs to be good. I still don't know where she is. I still don't know whether the truth she was protecting me from would destroy my sense of self, or justify it. What I do know is this. She didn't run away at the best moment of my life. She ran at the exact moment when my version of myself was about to become permanent. And sometimes I wonder if the most terrifying possibility isn't that she was wrong about me, but that she knew me better than I ever knew myself. If you want, I can keep going. There's still what I found in the police archive. There's still the second witness from that night. And there's still the question I haven't answered. If the truth finally proves I wasn't the person I believed I was, does that mean she was right to leave, or wrong to protect me? I didn't go to the police archive right away. I told myself I was being responsible. That I was giving things time to settle. That I wasn't acting out of obsession. But the truth is simpler and uglier. I was afraid that if I saw the records, something inside me would click into place, and I wouldn't be able to undo it. Memory is fragile. I know that now. You don't realize how much you rely on the idea that your past is stable until you're forced to question it. Until you're forced to admit that maybe what you remember isn't what happened, but what you needed to remember in order to keep living with yourself. The first time I dreamed about that night again, it was different. In the dream, the alley was brighter. Not lit by street lamps like I remembered, but washed in this harsh, almost white light. I could see everyone's faces clearly. Too clearly. And the man on the ground wasn't faceless anymore. He was looking right at me. When I woke up, my heart was racing, and my jaw hurt like I'd been clenching it for hours. That's when I remembered her warning. If details shift, stop digging. I didn't stop. The archive building smelled like dust and disinfectant. That specific government smell that makes you feel smaller the longer you stand in it. I told the clerk I was looking for records related to an incident from 8 years ago. Gave her the date, the location. She typed slowly, frowned. That case isn't digitized, she said. Why not? She hesitated. Some files are restricted. Restricted how? She looked at me then. Really looked at me. You'd need a formal request. And a reason. I almost laughed. What reason do you give for wanting to know whether you ruined someone's life on purpose? I was there, I said. I just want to understand what happened. That wasn't enough. I left, sat in my car, and stared at the steering wheel until my hands went numb. That night, I went through her letter again. Slowly, line by line, looking not just at what she'd written, but how. Where the pressure of the pen changed. Where the words tightened. There was a name I'd skipped before. Not Aaron's, not mine, a woman's name. I recognized it immediately. She'd been there that night. Her name was Leah. She'd been dating one of my friends back then. Quiet, observant, the kind of person who fades into the background because she doesn't demand attention. I remembered thinking she seemed uncomfortable that night, that she didn't like the bar, that she wanted to leave early. I remembered her standing at the mouth of the alley, arms crossed, not yelling, not intervening. Just watching. I hadn't thought about her in years. I found her online in less than 10 minutes. Social media makes ghosts easier to track than it should. She lived 2 towns over now. Worked in healthcare. Married. 1 kid. I stared at her profile picture for a long time before I messaged her. I typed and deleted 3 different versions. Finally, I wrote, "This is going to sound strange, but I'm trying to understand something that happened years ago. You were there. I think you might remember things I don't." She replied the next day. "I was wondering when you'd reach out. We met in a coffee shop halfway between our towns. Neutral ground. Bright. Public." She recognized me immediately. I barely recognized her. "You look tired," she said after we sat down. "So do you," I replied. She nodded. "I am." We didn't talk about the past right away. We talked about safe things. Her kid, my job, the weather. It felt like we were both delaying the same moment. Finally, she said, "You don't remember it the same way everyone else does." My chest tightened. What does everyone else remember? She wrapped her hands around her mug, stared into it like the answer might be there. "They remember you losing control," she said. "Not snapping, not blacking out, choosing." "That's not," I started. "I know," she interrupted gently. "That's not how you remember it." "No," I said. "I remember trying to break it up." She looked up at me then, eyes sharp but not cruel. "You did," she said. "At first." I waited. "There was a point," she continued, "where it stopped being about stopping anything." The way she said it made my stomach turn. "What point?" I asked. She hesitated. "After he was already down." The dream came back to me in flashes. The brightness, the clarity, his face. "I didn't," I said, but my voice sounded thin. "You didn't mean to," she said. "I believe that, but you didn't stop when someone else would have." I thought of her voicemail. "If you ever start remembering that night differently? Why didn't anyone say anything?" I asked. Leah's mouth tightened, because the people involved didn't want to look at their own roles. And because the system didn't need to. "What do you mean?" She leaned back. "That man wasn't just some guy. He'd been involved in other incidents. Other places. There was already a file." My head started to spin. "So they let it go." "They let you go," she corrected. "Because it was easier." When I got home, there was a missed call from a number I didn't recognize. No voicemail. I didn't need one. I knew it was Aaron. I sat on my couch, staring at the wall, replaying Leah's words. Choosing. That was the word that wouldn't leave me alone. Had I chosen? Or had I simply failed to choose differently? There's a difference, but it gets blurry when you stare at it long enough. That night, I dreamed again. Claire shook her head. "Still not something I can tell you." "Then why are you here?" I asked, hearing the edge in my voice and hating myself for it. "Because she asked me to check on you," she said. "Not to intervene, just to observe." I laughed. And I think you deserve one thing she didn't give you," Claire said. Context. We sat at the kitchen table. Claire didn't waste time. She didn't find the connection by accident, she said. She was looking for it. "That doesn't make sense," I replied. "Why would she?" "Because of how you talk about yourself," Claire interrupted. "About restraint, control, choice." She noticed it early. I frowned. "Lots of people talk like that." "Not the way you do," she said. "You frame it as a daily achievement. Like something that could fail if you stop paying attention." I had no response. "She didn't think you were dangerous," Claire continued. "She thought you were managed." That word landed hard. "She believed people like you existed on a spectrum," Claire said. "That under the right conditions, with the right accountability, you could live a perfectly good life." "And then?" I asked. "And then she realized she was one of the conditions," Claire said quietly. I asked the question I'd been avoiding since the beginning. Was she afraid of me? Claire considered it. "She wasn't afraid of what you'd do to her," she said. "She was afraid of what you'd justify if something else went wrong." I swallowed. "Did she love me?" I asked. Claire didn't hesitate. "Yes. That's why this broke her." Before she left, Claire handed me a folded piece of paper. "She told me to give you this only if you didn't try to follow me," she said. I didn't open it until she was gone. It wasn't long, just a paragraph, written in the same familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means you kept going longer than I hoped and stopped sooner than I feared. I need you to understand something. I didn't leave because of what you did. I left because of how well you learned to live with it. I wanted to marry you because I believed love could be another form of restraint. But love shouldn't be a leash. If you choose to keep digging, do it without me. If you choose to stop, don't do it for me either. Just be honest about why. I will always care about you. I just refuse to be the thing that makes you safe. I don't know what she's doing now. I don't know if she's happy. I know she's alive. That's all anyone will tell me. And maybe that's enough. Sometimes I still think about going public. About forcing the system to look at what it quietly allowed. About tearing open something ugly so it can't hide behind paperwork and language anymore. Sometimes I think about walking away from all of it. Moving, changing my name, becoming someone who never asks these questions again. Both options feel wrong in different ways. Because one feels like penance, and the other feels like escape. The truth, the one no one tells you, is that there's no final revelation waiting at the end of this. No single fact that will absolve or condemn me. Just a choice, every day, to notice the moment when restraint stops being a virtue and starts being a calculation. To recognize when certainty begins to feel comforting instead of dangerous. To remember her standing between me and the worst version of myself, and accept that she chose not to stand there anymore. She didn't run at the best moment of my life. She left me alone with it. And now, for the first time, I understand that this wasn't a punishment. It was a test, one I'm still not sure I'm passing. I thought that was where it would end. That once the context was laid out, once the last letter was read, the story would settle into something I could live alongside. Not resolve, just coexist with. That's what people mean when they talk about acceptance, right? You don't forgive yourself. You don't forget. You just stop moving. I underestimated how much unfinished truth resists being left alone. It started with a detail I couldn't place. I was standing in line at a grocery store when I heard someone laugh behind me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even familiar in the normal way. But something about it pulled a memory forward so abruptly that my vision blurred. I remembered the alley again. Not the violence, not the fall, the moment before. I remembered laughing, not mocking, not cruel, nervous. The kind of laugh you give when you're overstimulated and trying to discharge tension without realizing you're winding yourself tighter. That hadn't been in any of the files. That hadn't been in my dreams. It shouldn't have mattered. It did. I went home and pulled out the notebook. I started writing down sensory details instead of events. Sounds, smells, physical positions. I stopped trying to make myself look coherent on the page. And something started to emerge that I didn't like. I hadn't gone into that alley trying to stop anything. I'd gone in trying to control it. That distinction is subtle, but it changes everything. Stopping is about ending harm. Control is about directing it. A week later, I got a message from Leah. No preamble, just, I heard you requested the files. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I did. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Did you find what you were looking for? I typed and erased half a dozen answers. Finally, I found things I didn't remember. Her reply came quickly this time. That's what scared her. We met again. Same coffee shop, same table, different atmosphere. Leah looked at me like someone assessing whether an old structure was still sound enough to enter. You're not asking for absolution, she said after a few minutes. That's good. I don't think I deserve it, I replied. She nodded. No one does. That's not how it works. I asked her something I'd been holding back. Why didn't you say more back then? She sighed. Because you weren't the worst person in that alley. That hit harder than any accusation. And because, she continued, you looked like someone who would either learn nothing, or learn too much. Which one do you think I am? I asked. She studied me for a long moment. I don't know yet, she said. Neither do you. After that, I started noticing how often people deferred to me. At work, in conversations, in disagreements. I hadn't forced it. I hadn't demanded anything. I just learned how to occupy space in a way that made resistance feel inefficient. That realization was corrosive, because it meant that even when I wasn't angry, even when I was trying to be good, there was a version of me that people navigated around instead of engaging directly. I'd always thought of myself as someone who didn't seek power. But power doesn't require desire. Just tolerance. The next contact didn't come from Aaron. It came from someone I'd never heard of. An email. Again, no greeting. You're circling the real issue. I didn't bother asking who it was this time. Which is, I replied, intent doesn't matter as much as predictability. That stopped me. Explain, I wrote. The response took hours. Systems don't fear monsters. They fear variables. You were predictable. That's why you were allowed to move on. Allowed. The word echoed. I thought about the addendum. About the way the file had been framed. About how quickly my involvement had been contextualized into something manageable. I hadn't slipped through the cracks. I'd been sorted. That night, I dreamed of the wedding. Not the chaos. Not the absence. Just the ceremony. I was standing at the altar, waiting. Everyone was watching me, not her. Someone whispered, "Go ahead." I asked, "Go ahead with what?" And the voice said, "Say the words you've practiced." I woke up with my heart racing. Because I realized I'd been practicing words my whole life. Justifications, calibrated responses, apologies that stopped short of surrender. I thought those were signs of maturity. Now I wasn't so sure. I haven't tried to contact her again. Not because I don't miss her, but because I finally understand that wanting her back is tangled up with wanting an external measure of safety. A witness who could tell me, "Yes, you're still okay." She refused that role. That was her final act of love. Or her final act of self-preservation. I don't know which. Maybe it doesn't matter. The unsettling part, the part one don't say out loud, is that I feel more dangerous now than I did before. Not because I'm angrier, but because I'm clearer. I know how easily I can explain myself. I know how convincing I can be when I believe I'm right. And I know that if something like that alley happened again, the real battle wouldn't be between my fists and someone else's body. It would be between my instincts and my narrative. I don't tell this story because I want sympathy. I tell it because people like me don't look like what you expect. We look like men who go to work, who love sincerely, who mean well. We look like stability, and sometimes, that's the most dangerous disguise of all. She didn't run from me. She stepped away so she wouldn't become another system that made me survivable. I'm still here, still choosing, still not sure whether that means I'm changing, or just getting better at living with myself. And that uncertainty? That's the only thing standing between me and the man I'm afraid I could be. So if you're waiting for a final twist, a clean ending, a revelation that redeems or condemns me, there isn't one. Just this. I was left alone at the best moment of my life. And for the first time, I understand that being left alone was the point. This time, the alley was exactly how I remembered it. Dim, narrow, loud with echoes, but instead of chaos, everything was quiet. The man was on the ground, not moving. I was standing over him, breathing hard. And in the dream, I wasn't angry. I was calm. That's what terrified me. The next morning, I finally requested the files. Formal request, written statement. My hands shook as I signed my name. The clerk didn't look surprised this time. "It'll take a few weeks," she said. I nodded. Weeks felt both too long and too soon. On my way out, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You're crossing a line you can't uncross." I stared at it. Then another message came through. "She asked us to give you space. We agreed. You're making that impossible." Us. I typed back before I could stop myself. "Did she tell you to lie to me?" The response came almost immediately. "She told me to slow you down." That was worse. I don't know what scares me more now. The possibility that I did something unforgivable and built my life on top of it without knowing. Or the possibility that I knew, on some level, all along, and chose not to look too closely. She didn't run because she was afraid of me. She ran because she realized that once the truth surfaced, I might not be able to live with the version of myself that remained. And the most unsettling thought, the one I can't shake, is this. What if the reason she loved me wasn't despite what I was capable of, but because she believed I was capable of stopping myself? The files will tell me more. I know that, but I don't know if I'll recognize the man they describe. And I don't know whether, if she were here, she'd tell me to keep going, or finally beg me to stop. The files arrived on a Tuesday. Not in a dramatic envelope. Not hand-delivered. Just a notification in my inbox telling me that my request had been approved and the documents were available for in-person review only. No copies. No photos. No removal. I took the day off work without explaining why. I drove slower than usual, like time might stretch if I didn't rush it. I kept thinking about how many versions of myself were driving that car with me. The man who loved her. The man she left. The man in the alley. The man who still believed those were separate people. They seated me in a small room with a table bolted to the floor and a camera in the corner that wasn't pretending not to watch. The clerk placed a thin folder in front of me and reminded me of the rules. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. The folder was thinner than I expected. That should have comforted me. It didn't. The first pages were procedural. Date, time, location, names redacted, except mine. Mine wasn't redacted. That felt intentional. There were witness summaries, not statements, summaries, filtered, curated. I recognized fragments, shouting, A fall, someone trying to intervene. Then I reached Leah's. Subject observed primary aggressor continue physical engagement after initial threat neutralized. Primary aggressor. My hands went cold. The language was clinical, distant, but I could feel something underneath it. A choice had been made about how to describe me. About what version of me would survive on paper. I turned the page. Medical notes. I shouldn't describe them in detail. Not because they're graphic, but because they're precise. Impersonal. There's something uniquely horrifying about seeing harm reduced to measurements and probabilities. Permanent impairment, reduced impulse control, memory disruption. I felt dizzy, and then I saw the addendum. The addendum wasn't dated the same as the rest. It was added weeks later. Further review indicates involvement of Subject A in multiple prior incidents with similar behavioral patterns. Subject A wasn't me, but I knew who it was. The man from the alley. The one I'd hurt. The one whose life had splintered afterward. He hadn't been random. He'd been tracked, observed, allowed to move through places until he collided with the wrong person, me. And suddenly, the incident wasn't just about what I'd done. It was about what had been convenient. I don't remember leaving the building. I remember sitting in my car afterward, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles hurt, trying to reconcile two opposing truths. He wasn't innocent, neither was I, and somehow, that made everything worse. Because if the system had already decided he was expendable, then my role wasn't just accidental violence. It was participation. Aaron called that night. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. I know you've seen them, he said. His voice sounded strained now. Less controlled. I told you not to dig because I knew where it would lead. I listened to it twice. Then a third time. Then I deleted it. I wanted to hear her voice instead. I went back to the voicemail she'd left me. The one I'd saved but avoided replaying too often, like it might wear thin if I listened too much. This time, I noticed something new. In the background, just before she stopped speaking, there was another sound. A door closing, not slammed, carefully shut. She hadn't been alone. I started paying attention to patterns after that. Things I'd dismissed before. The way Aaron always positioned himself as a buffer. How he framed information so I'd arrive at conclusions he'd already prepared. How he talked about protection without ever naming who was being protected from whom. She hadn't trusted him. She'd used him, and he hadn't realized it. Or maybe he had, and that was worse. A week later, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. No greeting, no signature, just a sentence. You're asking the wrong question. I stared at the screen. I typed back, then what's the right one? The reply came hours later. Not, what did you do? But, why were you there? I hadn't asked myself that. Not really. Why that bar, that night, that alley? I told myself it was coincidence. Habit, youth. But coincidence doesn't explain patterns. I started looking at my own history with fresh eyes. The fights I'd minimized, the confrontations I'd framed as misunderstandings. The moments where people backed down not because I was right, but because I didn't. I'd always thought of myself as someone with a temper I'd learned to manage. But what if I just learned when it was safe to let it show? I finally tracked down the man. Not through official channels, through obituaries, support forums, a trail of half-forgotten posts. He was alive, living in assisted housing 2 counties over. I drove there without telling anyone. I didn't plan what I'd say. I didn't know if I wanted forgiveness or confirmation. When I saw him, sitting on a bench outside the building, staring at nothing in particular, my chest tightened. He looked older than he should have. Smaller. I stood there for a long time before he noticed me. When he did, he squinted, confused, then smiled faintly. "Do I know you?" he asked. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because the truth, the full truth, was that I didn't know what I was hoping he'd say. If he recognized me, I'd be a monster. If he didn't, I'd be a ghost. I left without speaking. In my car, I finally broke down in a way I hadn't since she left. Not loud, not dramatic, just this slow, shaking collapse where you realize there's no version of events that lets you walk away clean. That night, I dreamed of her again. She was standing in the alley, between me and him. Not pleading, not angry. Just watching, as if waiting to see which way I'd step. I don't know where she is. But I know now that she didn't disappear to protect herself. She disappeared to see who I'd become without her watching. Whether I'd chase the truth to absolve myself. Or stop when it became clear that understanding wouldn't make anything right. The files are closed. The witnesses have moved on. The man I hurt doesn't remember me. But I remember him, more clearly now than ever. And the question that keeps me awake isn't whether I was guilty. It's whether, given the same conditions, the same blind spots, the same quiet permission. I'd do it again, because if the answer is yes, then maybe she didn't run from the past. Maybe she ran from the future she saw waiting for me. I didn't hear from anyone for a while after that. No emails, no warnings, no Aaron. It was like I'd stepped out of a current without realizing how strong it had been until it let me go. The silence felt intentional, observational, like something was waiting to see what I'd do when no one was nudging me in either direction. That's when the worst part started. Not fear, not guilt, normalization. I went back to work. I answered emails. I laughed at the right moments. People stopped tiptoeing around me. The story of the wedding that wasn't had fully congealed into a socially acceptable version. Sometimes things don't work out. And the more normal everything became, the more unsettled I felt. Because if I could return to normal this easily, what did that say about me? I started keeping a notebook. Not a journal. I didn't write about feelings. I wrote about memories. Specific ones. Small ones. I treated my own past like a witness I didn't trust. I wrote down every altercation I could remember. Every moment I'd felt that familiar tightening in my chest. The way the world narrows just before something breaks. Patterns emerged whether I wanted them to or not. Always public. Always ambiguous. Always justifiable if you squinted. I'd never been the one to throw the first punch. I just made sure to throw the last one. That realization didn't come with drama. No spike of horror. Just a dull, sinking awareness that settled into my bones. I understood then what she meant by certainty being dangerous. One evening, about a month after the files, there was a knock at my door. Not Erin. A woman, early 30s, calm, professional. She held herself like someone who'd learned how to stand her ground without raising her voice. She said my name. I didn't correct her. My name is Claire, she said. I worked with her. Not officially. My pulse picked up. Where is she? About 3 weeks after Claire came to my apartment, I did something I hadn't admitted to anyone yet. I went back to that alley at night. Not in daylight, not with context or safety or the illusion of control. I went back at roughly the same hour it had happened years ago. Same day of the week. Same season. I wanted to know whether the place itself would wake something in me. It didn't. That was worse. The alley looked smaller than I remembered. Narrower. Less dramatic. There were new dumpsters. A security light that flickered on and off. Someone had painted over the old graffiti. I stood there for almost an hour. Nothing happened. No surge of anger. No rush of adrenaline. No intrusive memory. Just emptiness. And in that emptiness, something finally became clear. That night hadn't been exceptional. It hadn't required special circumstances. It had only required opportunity. I sat on the curb and thought about her letter again. I didn't leave because of what you did. I left because of how well you learned to live with it. That sentence used to feel like an accusation. Now it felt like a diagnosis. I'd spent so much time interrogating my capacity for violence that I'd missed the quieter problem. My capacity for adjustment. For rationalization. For folding anything, even harm, into a story where I could still function. I wasn't unstable. I was adaptable. That's when I understood why she never told me everything at once. Why the truth had come to me in fragments. Through other people, through implication and delay. If she'd sat me down and laid it all out, if she'd said, here's what you did, here's how it fits, here's why it matters, I would have responded the same way I always had. I would have processed it, categorized it, survived it, and nothing would have changed. She didn't want me to survive the truth. She wanted me to struggle with it. The last contact I had wasn't from Erin, or Claire, or Leah. It was from her. A single message, no explanation for how she decided it was okay to send it now. I heard you went back. That was it. No question mark. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I needed to know if it still felt like something. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again, finally. And? I typed. It didn't. There was a long pause. Long enough that I thought she wouldn't respond at all. Then. That's what I was afraid of. I asked her the question I'd never stopped circling. Did you leave because you thought I was dangerous? Her reply came slowly, deliberately. No, I left because I realized danger wasn't the right word. You're functional. That word again. You absorb things, she continued. You metabolize them. You don't break, you incorporate. I felt sick reading it. I didn't want to spend my life being something you incorporated. I didn't ask where she was. I didn't ask if she'd ever come back. Some questions only exist to protect the person asking them. Instead, I asked, do you think I can change? This time, the pause was longer than any before. When her reply finally came, it was the longest message she'd sent. I think change is possible when someone is willing to give up the story that makes them feel coherent. Not guilty, coherent. I didn't know if you'd ever want to give that up, and I didn't want to be the reason you pretended you had. That's why I left before the wedding. Before permanence. Before you could lock in a version of yourself that I would have had to live inside. If you change, it has to be without me as proof. That was the last message. I didn't reply, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because for the first time, silence felt like the more honest response. So here's where it ends. No arrest, no public reckoning, no redemption arc, just a man who learned, too late, that love can't be a stabilizing force for someone who's already too good at stabilizing himself. She didn't leave because she panicked. She didn't leave because she was afraid. She left because she understood something I didn't yet. That the most dangerous people aren't the ones who lose control. They're the ones who never have to. And I'm still here, living a normal life, making careful choices, telling myself every day that awareness counts for something. I don't know if it does. I only know this. She ran away at the best moment of my life because it was the moment my story was about to harden into something permanent. And she refused to be the thing that made it safe for me to stop questioning who I am. That's all that's left, and that's enough. A few months after her last message, I was promoted. I didn't apply for it. Someone put my name forward. That phrase again, passive, clean, inevitable. People congratulated me, told me it made sense, told me I was steady, reliable, good under pressure. I accepted. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror longer than usual. I tried to see myself the way other people clearly did. I practiced the expression I wear when I listen without revealing too much. The one that makes people feel heard and managed at the same time. It came naturally. That scared me more than anything that came before. I did one last thing after that. Not to chase the truth. Not to expose anyone. I wrote a letter. Not to her. To myself. I described the alley exactly as I now believe it was. No framing. No justification. No softened language. I wrote down what I did, what I chose not to do, and what I benefited from afterward. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't explain my intentions. I sealed it in an envelope. And then I made a rule. If I ever find myself certain, truly certain, that I am a good man, I will open it. People sometimes ask me if I'd take her back. I say I don't know. That's not humility, it's honesty, because wanting her back isn't the same as being safe to return to. She understood that before I did. The unsettling truth, the last one, is this. Nothing in my life fell apart after she left. That's how I know she was right. If the truth had come all at once, if she'd stayed and explained and softened and contextualized, I would have absorbed it. Like I absorb everything, I would have survived intact. She didn't want that. She wanted a fracture that wouldn't heal cleanly. Something that would force me to hesitate when certainty feels good. So when people hear this story and ask, was she right to leave? Or, are you dangerous? I don't answer. Because the real question, the only one that matters, is quieter. What do you do when you realize you can live with almost anything? I'm still answering that, every day, and that's where it ends. About a year after everything, I was asked to mentor someone at work. A younger guy, smart, intense. Everyone described him the same way they used to describe me. A lot of potential, needs direction, can be a bit much, but his heart's in the right place. The first time we met, he talked too fast, over-explained, got defensive when he felt misunderstood. I recognized the rhythm immediately. At one point, he laughed, short, sharp, nervous, and I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. Not anger, recognition. He asked me how I learned to stay so calm under pressure. I almost gave him the answer I'd given 100 times before. The polished one, the one about perspective and discipline and choosing your battles. Instead, I stopped. For a long moment, we just sat there in silence. He looked uncomfortable. I felt exposed. Finally, I said, I didn't learn how to stay calm. I learned how to make other people adapt to me. He frowned. Isn't that the same thing? No, I said. It just looks like it from the outside. He didn't understand. Not really. That was okay. What mattered was that, for once, I didn't give someone a version of myself that made everything easier. That night, I thought about her again. Not with longing, not with regret, with clarity. She didn't leave to punish me. She didn't leave to save herself alone. She left to remove a stabilizing force from someone who had learned to rely on stability instead of accountability. She took away my alibi. I still live a normal life. I still function. I still succeed. But there's a difference now. When I feel that narrowing, the urge to take control, to shape the outcome so cleanly it feels inevitable, I stop. Not because I'm afraid of consequences, but because I remember the emptiness of that alley. How nothing rose up in me. How easy it would be. This story doesn't end with redemption. It ends with vigilance, with a man who understands that the absence of chaos doesn't mean the presence of goodness. With the knowledge that being able to live with almost anything is not a strength, it's a responsibility. She ran away at the best moment of my life, and in doing so, she made sure that moment would never be the last time I questioned myself. That's the end, not because there's nothing left to say, but because anything beyond this would just be another story I tell to survive.